So for those of you who are unfortunate enough to be here 3 years ago and hear my talk on Where's the Terrorist, I'm afraid that some of the jokes will be the same. But I thought that because we've moved on, and we are still looking for terrorists, as you'll see, but we're also looking for my mother, who has Alzheimer's and was found wandering around Salisbury by the police, you might find that this vaguely interesting. And there will not be a single workspace. So this is a non-technical view, although I'm happy to talk about other things later if you want. So anyway, who the hell am I? Chris Barrington Brown. I'm a geek and proud of it. I was a soldier, full-time soldier for 12 years, and I've been a part-time soldier for 28. I'm an orienteer, which is why I have a bizarrely named company called Cunning Running Software. For those of you who are orienteers, you'll understand, and the rest you can look it up on the web. I'm a businessman of sorts. I'm a self-taught GIS writer in that I wrote a GIS before Map Objects was available and before Arc Objects and so on. But in the context of this, I'm the son of a mother who's got dementia, and because I started breeding very late and all my friends have got grandchildren and I've got a 14-year-old, I'm obviously also interested in if children go missing, you want to try and get them back. So this is all about looking for high-risk missing persons. And in the UK, which only has a population of 65 million or thereabouts, a person is reported missing every 2 minutes. So this is a big problem. We're only really interested in the high-risk missing persons. So that tends to be children, depressives, and seniors. But first, a little bit of history. So when I left the regular army, I wrote a piece of software which worked out whereabouts to put missiles around airfields and storage sites and things like that. So whereabouts do we put our missiles to get the best effects out of them? And then the RAF came to me just before the Second Gulf War and said, well, you've told us where to put our missiles for the last 20 years. Can you tell us where the bad guys are going to put theirs? So I scratched my head and said, well, yeah, I suppose so. So we ended up writing a piece of software for working out where the bad guys are going to put missiles to shoot down military and civilian aircraft with things called MANPADS, which are man-portable air defense systems, sit on your shoulder, shoot an aeroplane, heat-seeking, that sort of thing. You may have heard of them. But anyway, we ended up doing that, and that software is around every major civil airport in America, Australia, France, Britain, and a few others. We have a few architectural issues which mean that some of our technical decisions are not optimal. And a lot of you will be sitting there going, that's the most crass architecture I've ever heard of. And absolutely, it is. I quite understand. But my worst case is a corporal or a sergeant sitting in a slip trench in Afghanistan on a rugged laptop. He has no comms. He has nothing but possibly DVDs arriving with data on them, maybe hard disks, but normally a DVD. The whole thing is classified, which means that you can't remote into it, you can't connect to it, there's all sorts of issues like that. And every time a single line of code is changed, we have to have it reaccredited. So somebody comes along and checks whether the software is secure and whether it's leaking information or whatever. So just bear those in mind when you think of, well, why don't you just attach this to the web and do it as a web service? We can't. We don't have an internet. So we then moved on away from MANPADS. Why stop there? The TSA in the States said, we're worried about people taking pot shots with rifles and RPG-7s across the fence at LaGuardia. Can you work out where they can shoot from? So we said, yeah, that's trivial. It's just line of sight stuff. Surely you've got tools to do that. And they went, nope, we have a map and a China graph pencil, and we use that. And then the RAF came to us and said, we've been rocketed and mortared in Afghanistan and Iraq. Can you tell us where the bad guys are throwing mortar bombs and things at us? And we said, well, yeah, I suppose we could, but why do you need to? The Irish have been throwing rockets and mortars at us for the last 30 or 40 years. Surely you've got tools to work out where they're going to fire from. Nope, map on the wall, big pair of feet, we go walking. So I thought, business opportunity here. So we then added in rifles, mortars, rockets. We do a little bit, well, we do green lasers, and we do a little bit about whereabouts pilots for UAVs are. all using geodata. Because you've all heard, as geo people, everything happens somewhere. It usually happens somewhere for a reason. Well, we're trying to put that in a form that a policeman or a soldier who has no GIS training whatsoever, putting that into their hands so that they can work out what they need to do and where they need to do it. So once we know where these threats might come from, how can we mitigate the threats? So we then added a whole load of tools about putting in sensors, CCTV cameras, observation posts, electro-optical trackers, radars, and so on. Where do we go patrolling? And then once you've got a plan, how do you brief that plan to people up the chain of command and down the chain of command? So in terms of GIS, very simple GIS tools, any of you could do all of this if you were taught a little bit about ballistics, but you could do almost all of it with a copy of ArcGIS or QGIS or something and a copy of FME. But those aren't necessarily the sort of things that you want to give corporal in the trench who's very good at kicking doors down, but not necessarily so good at GIS. So then they said, well, what we're going to do is save some money in the UK, and the people who currently look after all the airports are going to be redeployed to do other things, and we're going to give the job of looking after the airports to a group of people called the Police Search Advisors, the POLSers. I don't know whether you, in your particular country, you have similar sorts of people, but they are trained police officers who know how to search things. So the idea was that we would retask the POLSers to give them this extra job. And I said, what you want me to do is to give them a piece of software which they're going to use once every year or two to do a job which they normally don't do and expect it to work. And they said, yeah, surely that'll work. And I said, no, it won't. If you don't use the software every week, every day, you lose it, you lose the skills, and you won't be able to get the capabilities of the software out. So what do these police search advisors do every day? And I was told they look for missing persons. So they look for children, depressives, dementia, and so on. So let's retask them. So how do they work at the moment? They work out where the person was last seen. They then use a whole load of search data, which has been built up over the years, which tells you things like a child aged between 8 and 14 with a bicycle who's gone missing will be 40% of the time will be found within 400 meters, and 50% of the time will be found within 600 meters, and they'll be found within 1 hour, 30 minutes, and so on. This data exists. The problem with it is it's taken as a snapshot. So about 10 years ago in the UK, a study was done. The data was captured from all of the historical data for the previous 10 years. And everybody used that then for the next 10 years. And about a year or so ago, they thought, getting a bit out of date, maybe we ought to do it again. So they took another snapshot, and there's another fantastic data set called iFind. But the trouble is it's a snapshot in time. For example, it doesn't take into account Pokemon Go. So let us suppose that you've got we worry about children who go missing because they go towards water, they don't know how dangerous it is, so they drown. So the first thing that we do when we do a search is to say, where is all the water within a certain distance of the place last seen? Now, what happens if actually they start getting run over on railroad tracks because they're sitting there on their phone going, where's the Pokemon, where's the Pokemon? That wouldn't be picked up in the data set. So we need to find some way of giving a positive feedback loop for data. So we're trying to identify the most likely areas, and we're also trying to identify the most dangerous areas, because we want to do the dangerous areas first, and then the most likely areas, and then everywhere else. So here's an example of the paper data. This is from the iFind data set, and it's, as you can see, it's got, assuming you can see this mouse on the screen, so for these children of this age group, they'll be on foot, they won't be in a private vehicle or on public transport, they're too young, and therefore it gives us percentage rates of how long it will take to find them and how far they'll be. Now, of course, these are only historical data, and as I keep being told by my pension advisor, past data doesn't necessarily tell us what the future will bring, but it's quite useful to as a starting point. And then similarly, it's got lots of other information like where were they while they were missing, who were they with when they were found, where were they located, and some notes and so on. So all of this data at the moment is in paper form. So why not computerize it? So that's what we've done. And we've captured all of the data into a database so the user can just go, I find children 1 to 4, double click on that, and up pops the data, which saves them searching for a lot of time. And then you can highlight various bits of this and then automatically put it onto the map. You just click where the person was last seen, you choose which of the rings you want, the software knows what sort of things you're looking for that particular type of missing person. In this case, I've got water. It automatically creates search areas for all of the water within that area, and then produces PDFs or Word documents or various other things as well, which you can then hand to the people who are actually going to go and do the search. Because in general, the police search advisor is a singleton, and they use civilian search and rescue teams or possibly other policemen who are not search trained to do the searching. So you end up with a tasking sheet. And you'd also quite like a layered PDF. So here, for example, you'll see down here, standard layered PDF, and I could switch off one of these layers. So between those two, I've got an aerial image, I've got a map. All of this is so far ahead of where they are at the moment. Most of them at the moment go out with a black and white photocopy of an Ordnance Survey map. And I love the Ordnance Survey, as you know, because there are probably some in the room who'll give me a hard time if I don't say that. But no, their data is absolutely magic. But a black and white photocopy of a map is not really that helpful. So we can do all of those. So, okay, we've got to this point. We're now 10 minutes in, 13 minutes in. I haven't mentioned FME, really, so probably ought to. So what we've done is to embed FME Objects into our solution. So for those of you who don't know, FME Objects is a headless version of FME Desktop. So it doesn't have a user interface. We provide all of that. But it enables us to run workspaces and so on through the workspace runner. The first reason that we bought this was to produce those layered PDFs. We looked at all the different ways that we could produce layered PDFs, and FME was by far the best. So the user can just highlight in our software what type of data he wants, presses export to layered PDF, and we export a whole load of different things, and we use a workspace runner to then create a layered PDF, which we can then give to the team who are actually going to do the searching. But then we realized, well, actually, it's pretty cool at managing data, which is what it was there for in the first place. So why don't we start using it to do that? So although we use Arc Engine as our back end, we also use FME to convert data sets into things that Esri doesn't read. For example, the Royal Australian Air Force got a whole load of height data in LAS format, I think. Can't remember what anyway. And they sent us an email saying, your software absolutely sucks. It can't read this wonderful height data that we've sourced. And I said, well, that's terribly sorry. I'm really sorry about that, Mr. Customer. Can you just tell us what format it's in and so on? And they said, oh, it's in LAS. And I said, well, Esri doesn't read LAS. And if you look on the small print at the bottom of our contract, it says we will read directly the things that Esri reads. However, here is an FME workspace. And if you just put that onto your system, and because it's just a text file, it can go through all of the firewalls. We don't have to reaccredit. It's absolutely magic. We just say, copy this file onto your system, press this button, point at it, point at the data, and it'll just happen. And I got the email back the following day saying, gosh, you're magic. I take back everything I said about you being rubbish software. So I start looking at Hero again, which is what I like. So thank you, SAFE, for enabling me to rescue that. But being more serious, it does mean that we can extend the functionality of our software in the field without having to go through reaccreditation, which is a very, very useful thing. Any of you who've been through that nightmare will understand. And we also use FME for doing quite a lot of geo-processing. So, for example, we want to know every point that is within 150 meters of a road. So we can then have an FME workspace which goes off, collects all of the road data within the clipping area that we're interested in. We'll then rasterize that with a buffer and so on. We could do that in Esri, but they would charge us extra for licensing and so on, and so FME does it as part of the package, which is wonderful. And we think that we're going to be adding new functionality to it in the future. I'm not quite sure what that new functionality will be. The joy of this whole area is that the customers are saying, wouldn't it be nice if? And we're saying, I think the technology is now able to do this. Are you interested in us going down a particular road? UAVs, for example, I'm quite excited about some of the stuff that's going on here at the conference about UAVs and the processing of data. So I think maybe we'll be adding more FME functionality to do that. So where's the future going? We think that we're moving from engine to runtime, for those of you who are in the Esri world. The trouble is that runtime isn't quite ready for what we want to do yet, but I'm told it will be by the end of this year. And so we think that the future is geo-package. Yes, the man who's going to make my life so much easier is sitting there, who's going to help me to... Because I don't wish to be rude about Esri because they're a business like anybody else, but the whole idea of runtime is that it consumes data which is produced on a nice big expensive system like ArcGIS Pro or whatever. But I don't want to put a copy of Pro onto every laptop because remember I'm sitting on in a trench with nothing, so I have to be able to do all of my mapping locally. So if I can produce a geo package using FME and then consume it using runtime, that seems to me to be a pretty neat way forward. I think we're going to do a lot more geo-processing with FME in the future as well. So what's the takeaway from all of this? So us, hurrah, plus Esri, hurrah, plus FME, big shout out because of where we are, plus the mapping, plus the statistical data, plus the police, safer missing persons. That's what we're trying to achieve. I'm delighted to answer any questions, and if you actually want to see real software doing real things, not in this sort of environment, I've got it all on my laptop, and stop me and buy one. Thank you.
So does anyone have any questions for Chris today about Cunning Running or about his workspace?
Do we have to go into the current demo?
No. I'll only give you the unclassified one, so you don't have to get body armor on. That's all right.
Anyone else?
How many missing people have you found?
Me personally, none. As far as we know, it is being used increasingly by the UK police to find missing persons. We don't get feedback, which I would like. One of the things that's happening at the moment, because this really started in October of last year for MISPERS, is that because we've got a standard in the UK, we can capture data in a standard way and feed it back. So you remember I talked about the 10-year snapshot. We now think that we can do that every month. So we can update the data. I hesitate to say big data because we're not talking big numbers, but it's the equivalent of big data. So if we capture a standard set of data for every MISPER occurrence, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, because of course you want to know where bodies are found if it ends up being a recovery rather than a rescue, then we should be able to keep the data set much more up to date so that when the Pokemon Go Craze 2 happens, we're actually able to do something more about that. I can't talk about some of the counter-terrorism stuff. I can talk about lasers. We've got 3 people who have been convicted of using green lasers around Southampton Airport using our software. They have... The trouble with green lasers is it's actually a terrible thing, but people don't get upset about it. But they were arrested, convicted, had to go and apologise to the pilot that they shone the green laser at, and so on. And the word gets out in the streets. Not a good idea to be shining green lasers at planes. Okay. Well, in which case, thank you very much, and I can now relax for the rest of the conference.
Yes.